Hey, welcome back to Butler on Business, and on the phone with us now is Walter Block. He's a fellow Austrian. Jason, introduce Dr. Block to the listeners.
Alan, we are honored to be joined on the phone by Dr. Walter Block. He earned a Ph.D. in economics at Columbia University. He is currently the professor and chair of economics at Loyola University and a senior fellow with the Mises Institute.
Dr. Block, welcome to the show. I guess you know our buddy Dan D'Amico down there as well.
Oh, yes. He's a former student of mine, and now he's my colleague.
Well, great. And we appreciate having you on. Now, I heard the people on the business channels like today, Bernanke do something, and I'm thinking, yeah, quit, close up, leave.
Yes, certainly. That would be great. I think that Bernanke is sort of like the fireman who's trying to put out the fire by pouring gasoline on it, and he started the fire as well. He's a pyromaniac and a fireman with gasoline. The Fed has caused this business cycle by lowering the interest rates artificially. This is a basic element of Austrian business cycle theory that Ron Paul certainly adheres to and has contributed to.
Well, one of the few, or if only, guys up there in Washington who has been trying to fight this fire is Ron Paul, and on this show we try to champion the principles of sound economics, and actually one of our listener polls right now has Ron Paul as an overwhelming favorite for the Republican Party, and I wanted to talk to you, Dr. Block, about an article you'd written recently where you actually argue that Dr. Paul has a chance of winning the election.
Well, I think he's got a magnificent chance of beating Obama. Whether he'll get the Republican nomination or not, I think, is a harder slog. He, in some polls, as you're quite right, he is number one, but in other polls he's as low as 5 or 6, and usually he comes in somewhere around 3 or 4 after Mitt Romney and Michelle Bachmann. And Rick Perry is not even in the race yet, and he's sometimes ahead of his fellow Texan. So I think that the big challenge is not so much Obama. The big challenge is these other Republican Tweedledum and Tweedledummers.
Why do you think that Ron Paul would have such a good chance against Obama if they were to go heads up?
Well, first of all, I think any Republican would have a decent chance against Obama because the economy is in the toilet bowl, so to speak. But I think that Ron Paul has a much better chance against Obama than any other Republican, and he does very well vis-a-vis Obama, because Ron Paul can out-left Obama. Obama came into power, his administration promised to end wars, and instead he's starting new wars in Libya. And he hasn't really gotten out of Iraq, and he hasn't gotten out of Afghanistan, whereas Ron Paul would not only get out of those 3 countries, he'd get out of, how many are there? It's hard to tell, maybe 150 different countries with about 800 military bases. As soon as those ships and planes could get the soldiers back, they'd be out of there, which would help us internationally and help us with Obama supporters, and also help with the budget crisis.
You know, the concern I have, though, is that even people that I think are fairly like-minded of mine kind of look at, because the way Ron Paul's been marginalized, they kind of think of him being as a little on the wacky side. And, you know, a lot of us that like Ron Paul that are like-minded think, I mean, he's the best guy out there.
Oh, yes. I think the media is very nasty with regard to him. They were worse in 2008, where he was treated as a crazy uncle or something. Now he's got a lot more respect, and also the other Republican candidates are starting to sound like him on the Fed. There was nobody against the Fed. Michelle Bachmann wouldn't be reading Mises on the beach, quote unquote, if it weren't for Ron Paul. In 2008, they were very militaristic and imperialistic. Now that even the Republicans, the other Republicans, are talking about bringing the troops home. And another point that Ron Paul, I think, could out-left the Obama is on drug legalization. The fellow Republicans have taken him up a little bit on the Fed bashing and on the war, but none of them have come anywhere near close to talking about legalizing drugs, and yet the NAACP has wakened from its long slumber. The reason I focus on them is because young black men are dying like flies because of this horrid, unjust law. And finally, the NAACP is saying, well, maybe we ought to rethink this, that they haven't come out for legalization. look, when we had prohibition of alcohol, young Italian men were dying, and you'd think that the Italian Defense League would try to put a stop to it. So Obama is a black president, and black people vote for him at the rate of, 95%, and white liberals who are supposedly on the side of blacks support him. And yet he is in charge of this monstrous war against drugs. By the way, he admits that he's a violator of it. Many years ago, he smoked some sort of dope or pot or whatever it was. Well, I don't know if there's a statute of limitations on that. Maybe Obama ought to arrest himself for doing that, in which case he wouldn't even be running. But I'm speaking a little giddily here. I don't think that that's going to happen.
Well, besides the social issues, besides the United States' imperialistic endeavors throughout the rest of the world, I think that Ron Paul also has some pretty sound policies when it comes to the economy. Can you maybe talk on his thoughts about a sound monetary system and out-of-control government spending?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Ron is magnificent on that, and perhaps that's where he's made the greatest contribution, because at least the war and drugs are comprehensible to most people, whereas this stuff about the economy is less comprehensible to most people. Look, the Fed came into effect in 1913. If you look at the 100 years before the Fed and the 100 years roughly after the Fed in 1913, we're almost there, the business cycle was placid in the previous century, whereas afterward it's like a roller coaster. So the Fed has destabilized the economy. The Fed is supposed to keep the value of the dollar going, and yet the dollar is worth something like 3 or 4 cents right now compared to the dollar's value when the Fed started. So the Fed has been an absolute and utter disaster. This is central planning for the monetary field. Monetary field is a crucial part of the economy, and we've Sovietized it. And Ron Paul is saying, well, first let's monitor them, and then let's get rid of them. His book is End the Fed, not Monitor the Fed. I think the only reason he was trying to monitor them is because he could get some support from even people like Bernie Sanders way over on the left.
Dr. Block, I give you an idea of the type of show that we have. Last night I was doing research for some segments for a segment next week on monetary policy, and one of the stats I came across was in the 150 or so years roughly before the Fed, the dollar's value was generally plus or minus 5%. So we basically had a very stable value on our money supply, and since the Fed, we've lost 96%, I think is the figure now. I mean, I one of the lines I use, the only thing the Federal Reserve has managed to do is turn a nickel Coca-Cola into a dollar Coca-Cola.
That's magnificent. Well, Ron Paul wants to link the dollar to gold, and gold is, $1,600 or so per ounce. Gold has kept pace with things, whereas the dollar has been sinking like a stone. That's a great line. I'm going to steal that one from you.
Use it away. I may have stolen it from somebody else. I don't know. I read so much.
Well, in this field, plagiarism and theft is okay. We all use good stuff. But if the dollar were linked to gold, they're not printing any more gold. You have to go out and discover it, which limits the government. Why does the government hate gold? Why does mainly the economics profession hate gold? Well, mainly the reason the economics profession doesn't like Ron Paul or gold is because they've been bought out by the Fed. There have been studies showing that the Fed has pretty much subsidized the entire economics profession. That's not true. Just the macro money part of the profession by giving them scholarships and fellowships and getting them publications in their prestigious journals. The Fed has pretty much bought that part of the economics profession that pontificates about that. That's why Ron Paul can't get much traction there. They've been bought out, or they've been sold, or whatever, bought and sold.
Well, Dr. Block, we're unfortunately out of time, but we certainly appreciate you coming on the show and speaking with us today. It's not only a political battle, but it's also a philosophical battle, a battle of ideas, and I think Ron Paul's bringing that to the forefront, and I think you've also done an exceptional job bringing that to the forefront as well.
Well, thanks for having me on your show. It was a pleasure.
We look forward to having you on again, Dr. Block. Jason, as we leave today's show, the Dow is now down 216 points. The S&P is off 30. I think we're going to see 1150 here very quickly.